What's up, guys? Today I am joined by a very special guest, Steph Sanchez, now known as Steph 49K. How are you doing tonight, Steph? How, the 53-man roster is, finally settled, at least for now, but how are you doing tonight? Football is less than 2 weeks away, or 10 days away, I think 9 to 10 days away, but how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think it's 12 days away, so it's getting close. These last couple days have been, it's been busy in 49ers land a little bit with the cut to 53. And then today, like keeping tabs on the practice squad and how that was going to shake out. So I'm definitely looking forward to slower days right now leading up to week 1. And then I'll ramp back up again and not stop until the end of the season. Excited for it.
Yep. Well, before we jump into the Niners topics, now I mentioned her new name, Steph 49K, but she was formerly known as Stragosaurus, which was a pretty darn good nickname, I would say, or pretty darn good Twitter handle. But now that she is no longer known as Stragosaurus, I feel like we should have a moment of silence just to respect the name of Stragosaurus now that is no longer with us and now that your name is Steph 49K. So just a little moment of silence, like a 5 to 10 seconds moment of silence just for the name Stragosaurus, because I think it was a darn good nickname, and now it is sadly no longer with us. So just 5 to 10 seconds just of silence.
You even went off camera.
All right, we're back. We're back. let's
I
let's
can't.
I like the new name
Uh,
too. I like the new name too, but I mean, Stragosaurus will never be forgotten. That's all I'll say. But
it won't. It won't. Actually, what spurred the name change was someone after I was in Minnesota. Someone literally DM'd me and was like, I don't know if you had really thought about this, but I feel like you should change your username to make it more easier to discover as you're getting started and gaining a bigger audience. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you're probably right. And yeah, I mean, before that, I honestly hadn't really thought about changing it all that much. But after I got that DM, I was like, yeah, he's probably right. So yeah, that was the reason behind the name change. But Stragosaurus is never really gone.
yep. Well, let's jump right into it. I mean, the biggest topic outside of Jimmy Garoppolo is that the 53-man roster was announced. There was a couple of moves today. Trey Sermon, who first made the 53-man roster and then ended up getting waived today, and they added, I forgot the guy's name from the Browns.
It was Blake
Some
Hance.
Blake Hance. They added Blake Hance, which actually rhymes with Trey Lance, but they added Blake Hance on the team and they waived Trey Sermon. But overall, the Niners kept 3 quarterbacks, which I was actually happy about because they kept Brock Purdy, who I wanted on the team, over Nate Sudfeld. They obviously kept Jimmy Garoppolo, which we'll talk about later. The running backs, they kept Jordan Mason, which I was also super happy about. I wanted him to make the team. Great that he made the team. Elijah Mitchell, obviously, Ty Davis Price, Trey Sermon, who first made the team, but now is no longer on the team. Jeff Wilson, obviously, Kyle Juszczyk, who's our fullback. And then the Niners actually kept 5 wide receivers with Brandon Ayuk, Danny Gray, Jawan Jennings, Ray McLeod, and Debo Samuel. They also kept 3 tight ends in Ross Dwelly, George Kittle, Charlie Warner. But the Niners, obviously they announced a 50-man, 3-man roster. I'm not going to name all of it, but they definitely did announce it. But in your opinion, what was your favorite player that the Niners kept, or what was the best thing the 49ers did with their 53 in your opinion?
Well, I think the easiest answer to this is, of course, Jordan Mason, who was a fan favorite and for good reason. And I know the fear was this entire time was, would the team elect to keep him on the 53 with all the other options that they have at running back? And they did. They decided to let go of Jermichael Hasty instead, who I do think they would have wanted to bring Hasty back on their practice squad. He ended up getting picked up by the Jags. But that to me was one of the biggest good decisions that they made with this 53 man, as well as Samuel Womack. But I think we already, like, that was a move that was predetermined after they cut Darquez Denard, right? So that we knew that Samuel Womack was going to make this roster right after that. But I definitely have to point out, just how quickly Womack came along and how great he played throughout the preseason. Definitely one of the biggest risers of training camp in the preseason, and definitely excited to have him on the 53 for sure.
Yep. Obviously, Jordan Mason is obviously the one of the most common answers because he was a guy that was a standout at camp. You also said that he was balling out in camp. Same thing with Jason Aponte. He was also a training camp. He was that one player that everybody was talking about throughout training camp. So obviously glad that he made the roster. But I'm gonna go with a different player, and I'm gonna go with Mr. Irrelevant and Brock Purdy because I actually wanted Brock Purdy to make the roster over Nate Sudfeld. And before the Jimmy news, I was happy that they did actually, keep Brock Purdy because I thought he played relatively well in the preseason. Now, the Texans game was a little bit shaky, but overall, I thought I'd rather have Brock Purdy on the roster than Nate Sudfeld, and I liked Brock Purdy more than Nate Sudfeld. So I'm glad they kept Brock Purdy, and obviously, we'll talk about Jimmy Garoppolo a little bit, but to make it short and simple, I would say Brock Purdy and Jordan Mason. And then one other thing I would say is not guys that necessarily made the roster, but yesterday, Kimoko Toure and Jason Poe, we thought were
Yep.
gone. And we thought they were
Yep.
gone. And then they brought him back on the practice squad today, which I was super ecstatic about because I like Kimoko Toure. I thought he had a lot of potential, proven, had 5.5 sacks last year with the Colts. I liked him, very explosive. And then obviously Jason Poe, who played relatively well also in the preseason games, the first two preseason games. So glad those guys are also back on the practice squad. But yeah, I'm happy with what the 49ers did with their 53, especially also keeping Teray on the practice squad and also keeping Jason Poe, which I thought both of those guys were gonna be gone.
Yeah, to raise a steal on the practice squad. I actually was surprised that he was able to clear waivers, and I mean it just speaks to the culture that the 49ers have, that even veterans, even if they don't make the 53, they want to stay around this team. I think that says a lot about what they've built around here.
Yep. And I mean, even with Teray, obviously now he's back on the team, but when Teray got cut, I mean, that just shows how talented this Niners D line is and how they couldn't keep all these
Exactly.
defensive linemen because that Niners D line compared to 2019 starters were great. And I don't think the Niners can ever come close to their starters in Ford, Armstead, Buckner, Nick Bosa. But this 2022 defensive line, they have some pretty good starters. And then they also have a lot of depth. And I mean, Kimoka Toure, cutting a guy like Kimoka Toure, caliber player of his caliber, just shows you how much depth and how much talent this Niners defensive line does have.
Yeah, the 49ers have backups that could be starters on other teams easily. So yeah, I mean it definitely speaks to it. And like that's not even pointing out the fact that Jordan Willis originally didn't even make the roster, the 53. It wasn't until like they had to put Jimmy Ward and Curtis Robinson on IR that Jordan Willis had a spot back on the roster. But again, like to your point, it just speaks to how deep this defensive line is, and they're keeping 10, which is, it's a pretty sturdy group of guys there on the defensive line.
Yep. Well, we talked about what our favorite things were and who our favorite players that the Niners kept. But what was a move that you necessarily didn't like, or what was a player that the Niners let go that you wanted on this roster? Or is there a player that the Niners let go that you wanted on the roster?
On the roster, yeah, I could definitely make some arguments, but after seeing like who made the practice squad, I'm okay. Like Jason Poe, I would have said, and I would have also said Kimoko Toure. Like I said, that was a surprise cut to me, but I'm glad those guys are on the practice squad, so I'm not really upset about it anymore. I was originally a little bit confused about why the 49ers elected to keep three quarterbacks. I know you said you were happy that Brock Purdy made the roster, and I do understand why they kept Brock Purdy over Nate Sudfeld from a financial standpoint. But I just felt like when your top two quarterbacks are Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, you're probably never gonna see the third guy on the field, right? So that was my kind of standpoint that I think there were positions of greater need besides a third string quarterback taking a valuable roster spot who isn't gonna see playing time, God forbid, right? And that position could have gone elsewhere, maybe to a Jason Poe, maybe to a Kamoko Ture, just throwing names out there, right? But
Yeah.
to me, that was a little confusing, but it is what it is. And like I said, happy that guys like Quantrez Knight, Poe, and Kamoko Ture are on the practice squad. So it's water under the bridge at this point.
Yep. I have no complaints, honestly. I was concerned about letting go Poe and obviously Terry, just like you said,
Yeah.
and they're on the practice squad, so I'm happy at the end of the day, and I have no complaints. I think the Niners did a great job. Now I agree with you maybe on that quarterback that I don't really think if Trey Lance gets hurt, I don't really think Brock Purdy's gonna see the field. But it did make sense from a financial standpoint to keep Purdy, and I thought he played better in the preseason than Sudfeld. So, but honestly, I really have no complaints. I think the Niners did a phenomenal job making that 53 and cutting down players. And one guy that also got picked up was Tariq Castro Fields, who got picked up by the Commanders, which
Yeah.
definitely sounds weird because I don't really. That's a new team, obviously, new name for a team, but the Commanders. Tariq Castro Field got picked up by them, but overall, I'm happy with this Niners team. We'll see how this season goes, obviously, but so far it's looking good. But let's jump right into the other news that happened a couple of days ago, or on Monday to be specific, or Monday or yesterday. But who's back? Obviously I put it as a title as the
You
Eminem
have to
song. Guess
sing
who's
it. You have
back?
to sing it.
Guess who's back? Back again. Yep. Well, I sang that completely out of tune, but we have Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, a lot of us expected Jimmy Garoppolo to be released or cut. And I remember like an hour or two before, I'm sitting down with my friend and I'm like, he's gonna get cut tomorrow. One of my friends like, what's gonna happen with Jimmy G? I'm like, he's gone by tomorrow. He has to be gone by tomorrow. And then I'm in the middle of PE class and we're playing basketball and I see the Twitter notification, and I'm like, no. And I stopped playing basketball. I put my I took myself out of the game, and I'm like, this can't be happening. This literally can't be happening. But I want to ask you, what was your reaction when you found out Jimmy Garoppolo was going to be on the 49ers for another season?
I think my reaction was like everyone else's, right? Like initially, upset, uh, that they couldn't get a trade going, and two, like how could you be so stupid to like, keep him on the roster? But that quickly passed, right? Like I think I can talk myself into pretty much any move that the team makes. I try to rationalize it in my head. That's just what I do, but there's obviously some good and some bad that can come from this, but I feel like the reason that the team did it is because they're looking at the good. They're looking at the benefit that Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup can bring to this team. Should the unthinkable happen with Trey Lance, this is a Super Bowl team. Like this roster is Super Bowl ready. They are stacked. We all know this. Like, why would you mess around with that? Why would you take any risks if you don't have to, right? So, if you have the opportunity to keep Jimmy Garoppolo, which it kind of seemed like it almost fell on their lap. Like I feel like in hearing, what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch had to say about it, like they also were not expecting him to come back or for them to be able to bring him back. But it kind of just worked out that way, and if that opportunity falls on your lap where you can have a really good backup quarterback, sure, like why won't you do it? I certainly don't think it's an indictment on Trey Lance like a lot of people think. A lot of outside media and, outside fans are, poking fun at the situation and thinking that it was just a matter of time before Jimmy Garoppolo like, ends up starting because Trey Lance is bust. That's what people say, but I really don't think that's what the team thinks. And I mean, like I said, there's a small margin of error in this and for things to go perfectly. Because one thing that I mentioned, I had like a reaction video right after I heard the news, and one of the things that I thought was bad in this situation is the fact that the first time Trey Lance throws an interception, he has a bad game, and you know it's going to happen because it's his
Yeah.
first year as a starter. It's going to happen. He's very volatile right now. And so whenever that happens, there's going to be fans who, are going to make an uproar, which fans, who cares? Like the locker room, I don't think really hears any of that noise. That's one thing. But the second thing is, the media is going to start asking questions. Beat writers after games are going to start asking questions. Kyle Shanahan about Jimmy Garoppolo. Did you think about putting him in? Things like that. And that's what you don't want. And it's interesting in a way that, last year, as Jimmy Garoppolo with the starter and Trey Lance as the backup, it was pretty much the same dynamic, right? Like
Yeah.
anytime Jimmy Garoppolo had a bad game, it was like, have you thought about starting Trey Lance? Like it's so now the roles are reversed. And we just have to hope that Trey Lance is going to have a long leash, just as Jimmy Garoppolo did last year, and then it pays off for this team, which I think it will. And I think Trey Lance will have a pretty long leash because the team knows that they have to be patient with him. They know that he was raw coming out, and they know there are going to be some bumps in the road. There are going to be some plays where he looks terrible, and on the other hand, there are going to be some plays where he looks amazing and he looks like your franchise quarterback. So I think they just got to let it play out, let him grow along the way, and I think it's going to be okay. What you don't want is a situation where you stump his growth, right? By, at the first sight, maybe consider publicly consider Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Because that would then, hurt his ego, potentially his confidence. And that's something you don't want to do to your starting quarterback. So, definitely a very like tricky situation. I think they put themselves in. While it is a really good decision from like a roster building standpoint, considering this is a Super Bowl roster, they've really protected themselves and ensured themselves. But it'll be interesting throughout the season how they, continue to navigate, the quarterback room.
Yep. I mean, I put out on Twitter right after I heard it, I was like, no! Exclamation, exclamation point, exclamation point. I was like, no, this can't be happening. Now, obviously, a day later, if I'm looking at it as a pure business decision, I think it was the right decision, right? You know,
Hmm.
you restructured his contract. He's
Yeah.
getting less money now, and now you have a backup and you have an insurance policy. Let's say
Yes.
insurance policy for if Trey Lance either struggles, number one, or if Trey Lance gets hurt, you have a guy that can come in who knows the playbook, who's been in the system before, and that can come in and win games. So obviously, we know Jimmy Garoppolo brings that to the table. But if you're looking at it outside of the realm of football or just what's on the field, from a fan's perspective and from the national, when you're looking at it from the national media's perspective, Trey Lance is already under a lot of pressure. So having Jimmy Garoppolo there, having Jimmy Garoppolo not there, it doesn't make a difference because Trey Lance has to perform, right? Either way. But this is a bad example, but when I first started watching the Niners was 2015, 2016. And it was Blaine Gabbert and Colin Kaepernick. Both of those guys were the quarterbacks. Now, both of those guys were okay at the time, but when Blaine Gabbert would struggle, people would be calling for Colin Kaepernick and saying, put Cap in the
Hmm.
game, put Cap in the game.
Yep.
And then when Cap would struggle, they would say, put Blaine Gabbert in the game, and the fans would yell that. So I think it kind of brings like Trey Lance obviously has to perform, but the national media and the beat reporters, like you said, will ask questions to Kyle Shanahan if Trey Lance doesn't start off well, if Trey Lance doesn't win a certain amount of games or loses a game. Oh, is Jimmy Garoppolo? Are you thinking about starting Jimmy Garoppolo? Is Jimmy Garoppolo an option for this team? It brings unnecessary attention to this team when you're looking at it from a fan's perspective, when you're looking at it from the media's perspective, and without Jimmy Garoppolo, and I always make this example, what Bill Belichick did with the Patriots last year was smart because Mac Jones now he did play well, relatively well for a rookie, but he cut Cam Newton. He said, we're rolling with Mac Jones. We'll take the hits, we'll take the punches. We know he might struggle at times, and Mac Jones did struggle at times. He struggled in
Hmm.
that Saints game and he struggled early on, But then after he picked it up and he got better game by game, made the Pro Bowl, it was fine. But having Jimmy Garoppolo, and same thing if with the Patriots, if they kept Cam Newton, was what would happen if we go back to week 2 or week 3 when they were playing the Saints and Mac Jones throws 2 interceptions, 3 interceptions. The Patriots fans will be calling for for Cam Newton to start, and they would be chanting
Mhm.
Cam Newton. And you don't want your rookie quarterback to be playing, be under center, and he's struggling, and the fans are chanting Jimmy Garoppolo's name or Cam Newton's name. So what did Bill Belichick do? He said, "We're cutting Cam Newton. We're rolling with we're rolling with Mac Jones. Whatever happens, happens, right?" So obviously, having Jimmy Garoppolo on this team, it's great because he's a good backup. He knows the system. But if Trey Lance doesn't perform well, I think it brings a lot of unneeded and unnecessary attention to this team.
Yeah, and another point that I want to make is that the Jimmy Garoppolo has a no trade clause, but it could be waived, right? Should a situation come along that's favorable to Jimmy Garoppolo, and he thinks it's a great opportunity for him, and the team is also happy with what they would get in return, they can waive the no trade clause, and maybe mid-season, like, we don't know what's going to happen. There's always like a quarterback that ends up getting injured at some point in the season, and sometimes it happens to be to a playoff team, and or a team that has like playoff hopes, right? And they don't want to just tank and lose their entire season. So a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo at that point would look very um would be very appealing to a team like that. And if Jimmy Garoppolo shares the same sentiment for that team, then very well, like, mid-season, maybe, like, it's totally possible that a trade happens. But again, a lot of things have to be favorable for that to happen, right? So maybe even that is not a huge chance of that happening. But to your point, like the Patriots cutting Cam Newton, I think it would be in the 49ers' best interest to also, want to continue to trade Jimmy Garoppolo in the season should a situation arise. Again, Jimmy Garoppolo has to prove the trade, but still, and the fact that they kept Brock Purdy maybe is an indication that they do want to trade Jimmy Garoppolo still at some point in the season, right? So I think that as well is a way of ensuring themselves. If they trade away Jimmy Garoppolo, they have their backup quarterback and Brock Purdy. So, yeah, I mean, maybe that's another reason that keeping Brock Purdy was a not so bad of a move, right?
Yeah. Yep. And obviously, this is another topic that we had, some of the pros and cons, and we already kind of discussed it about some of the pros and cons. Like we mentioned, the pros, obviously, Jimmy's a backup. He knows the system. If Trey Lance gets hurt, he's a great insurance policy to have because he knows the system. He's already showed that under center when he is a Niners quarterback, you can win with Jimmy Garoppolo. So obviously, we know that much. But obviously, the con is that it brings a lot of unnecessary attention to this team. The fans, obviously, and Niner fans aren't patient. I'll just be honest. Niner fans
No.
are some of the most impatient fans in the NFL. They just are. So Trey Lance obviously had a lot of pressure, but we'll see. Like the thing about like not having Jimmy Garoppolo on this team is that whatever would happen, you kind of have to roll with Trey Lance, right? Through the ups and downs.
Hmm.
Now, I think that the Niners probably will do that unless Trey Lance is just horrible. The offense can't get nothing going.
Yep.
We're struggling
Agree.
on offense. We're struggling to even move the football. And if that happens, then yes, I could see Jimmy Garoppolo coming in. But for the most part, unless Trey Lance gets hurt, I think Trey Lance is the guy. But he's under a lot of pressure, and without having, if Jimmy Garoppolo hypothetically wasn't on this team, let's say Trey Lance doesn't beat the Rams. Okay, let's just hypothetical because when a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo beats the Rams. That's just what a lot of people say. Jimmy
Hmm.
Garoppolo's a winner, and we have a great record when he's under center against the Rams. Let's say Trey Lance doesn't beat the Rams, and we're like 3-3, or we're sitting at 500 going into that week playing the Rams, and we lose against the Rams. What's the national media gonna say? What are the beat reporters gonna ask? They're gonna ask, is Jimmy Garoppolo an option, or was Trey Lance a bust? Was Trey Lance the right pick? Should the Niners move over to Jimmy Garoppolo? It brings a lot of unnecessary attention to your football team. that you wouldn't have if Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't on this team. So obviously, like I said, the pro is that you have a backup that knows the system and is an insurance policy if Trey Lance either gets hurt or if Trey Lance doesn't perform well and the offense can't get going. But a con is that it adds a lot of unnecessary attention if Trey Lance does struggle. Whereas if Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't on this team and Trey Lance struggled and he wasn't having good games, Trey Lance could at least learn from it, and he could still get more game reps and still be the starter going into the next week. Whereas now that Jimmy Garoppolo is on this team, if Trey Lance does struggle, questions definitely will be asked. Yep, well, you kind of briefly mentioned it. Do you think Jimmy is still on the trade market? Do you think a team wants Jimmy Garoppolo, or do you think the Niners possibly could trade him mid-season?
I think there were teams that were definitely interested in Garoppolo should he have been released. Like, absolutely, the Seahawks would have been one of those teams, being the first ones to call, picking him up in the airport, and probably the Browns as well. I mean, those were two teams that right off the bat were probably waiting. Maybe even the Texans, I don't know, but yeah, I got to excuse me. I have to imagine there's some interest still, and with the lower cap hits that he brings now at his reduced salary, I think that it makes a trade now seem like an easier pill to swallow for another team. But that being said, he didn't have much of a trade market, this entire off season after the shoulder surgery. So it's kind of hard to say if, a team like the Seahawks, who I still don't think the 49ers would trade him there, and a team like
They're
the
definitely not
Browns.
trading them there. That
No,
because
yeah,
a couple of days ago, I mean, John Lynch. There was reports that John Lynch was scared of playing the Seahawks week 2. So that
yeah,
would make no sense if mid-season they're like, "Hey, Seattle calls up the Niners and say we want Jimmy Garoppolo for whatever it might be," and John Lynch is like, "Yeah, sure, we'll give him to you mid-season." But before the season
yeah.
started, we were worried about him. Yeah, we were worried about him coming on your roster and playing you guys week 2.
Right. So it's not going to happen. I think really the only scenario in which it would happen is if a quarterback from another team um, gets hurt and they need someone.
Yep. Is Jimmy still on the trade market? I think he definitely is, and I think teams probably are more willing if their quarterback goes down to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo at the salary that he's currently at, which was definitely reduced a couple of days ago. So I think teams are definitely more willing if their quarterback goes down. But I really don't see it happening unless, like you said, there's a team that's a playoff team or there's a team that's contending and their quarterback gets hurt mid-season, their quarterback gets hurt and they need a guy to come in. Then maybe a team could trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. But like I've always said this, is that when your starting quarterback gets hurt, the odds of you making the playoffs or the odds of you being a Super Bowl contending team kind of goes out the window. And now the only exception to that you could say is Nick Foles and Carson Wentz. But I don't
Mhm.
think if Nick Foles played that whole entire season that the Eagles would have made the playoffs or made it to that Super Bowl run. I just don't think so.
I mean, yeah, it definitely goes out the window because more often than not, it's your backup quarterback
Yeah.
going out there, or you have to revert to finding some, free agent quarterback that's been collecting dust, while the season began. He's just been
Joe
sitting there.
Johnson.
Yeah, but in this case, if a team traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, I feel like that would be a way to keep their playoff
Hopes alive.
hopes
Yeah, it
alive.
definitely improves
Yeah,
your chances. It definitely
yeah,
improves your chances of having a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo compared to, whatever backup quarterback, rookie, undrafted guy. Definitely improves your chances. But like I said, Jimmy Garoppolo at his current price point, teams are definitely, I would say, if midseason their quarterback gets hurt, teams are definitely more willing to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo because of that price point. But unless a contending team, because I don't think any garbage team would be like, oh, let's trade for Jimmy Garoppolo because it doesn't
yeah,
really matter to
exactly.
them.
And
And
Jimmy
like,
Garoppolo wouldn't want to go to a garbage
yeah,
team.
yeah, and like people were throwing out the Texans early on, and I remember before the season started, like a couple of months before, people throwing out the Texans, but I'm like, Texans have Davis Mills. They're not making it to the
Yep.
playoffs. They're not really going anywhere. They're not probably winning maybe 5 to 6 games if that's like their potential. That's like their ceiling. It's like 5, 6 wins maybe. But outside of that, like they're not really doing nothing this year. So going and trading for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, this was when he was expected to get paid like 20 something million. Why would they do that? Like they're not really gonna go anywhere with Jimmy Garoppolo or with Davis Mills because that team still has a lot of work to do. But like I said, if a team, playoff team or contending team, their quarterback gets hurt midseason, I think a team could definitely call up the Niners and say we want Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think it could happen. But the odds of that happening, we don't know. But we will see. We will see. We'll see what happens this season. This season is going to be definitely an interesting season. Before we were obviously excited because Trey Lance was the guy, but now we have another storyline with Jimmy Garoppolo, and we'll see what happens with the Trey Lance Jimmy Garoppolo dynamic and what happens this season. It's definitely going to be interesting to see.
Never a dull moment with this team.
Never is. David McNew says, "Why are we scared of Jimmy G on the Sea Chickens? Our defense would eat him up."
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have that sentiment. I know, but we're talking about the same team that has overvalued Jimmy Garoppolo pretty much
Yeah,
every step of the way. Especially John Lynch. Has he loves Jimmy Garoppolo. He's the reason that Jimmy Garoppolo is here.
and
So
I quote, "We will not cut or release Jimmy Garoppolo. He is too good of a quarterback." And that's what ended up
I don't
happening.
disagree with that, by the way. Like I feel like releasing him and for nothing would have been a huge L for this team. So that's another sense that it made sense for, oh, like, oh, you're still here, no one wants you, okay, you want to stay, all right. Like it just kind of happened to work out that way. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be scared of Jimmy Garoppolo on the Seahawks.
Me
I mean,
neither.
that roster is terrible.
It's atrocious. I
He-
mean, and like
it's
speaking of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, like would those guys
they
really
would
want? They would
they would
hate. They would hate
but let's be honest, they're gonna hate their whoever is throwing to them this
it.
season because they there's not much
Russell
there. But
Wilson to Drew Lock, like
yeah, it's a huge drop off. At
yeah,
least Jimmy Garoppolo would, he could probably win the Seahawks a
be in the
few more
middle. You
games.
could say he'd be in the
Yeah,
middle. Yeah,
he could win you a few more games than Drew Lock would for sure. And another point, I spoke to Jay about this. It was hours before we found out Jimmy Garoppolo was staying. And he was like, yeah, like just have him go to the Seahawks because if Jimmy Garoppolo is on there, they're not going to tank. They're not going to have like a CJ Stroud. They're not going to have a chance at one of those top quarterbacks. Think long term, um, because if Jimmy's there, they're probably a mid round pick, maybe. I
yes,
don't know. And then
yeah.
by that point, you're out of contention for one of the top QBs. So at this point, the Seahawks are going to get a really good quarterback come next year's draft. So that's what John Lynch
Bryce
should be afraid
Young,
of.
CJ Stroud.
Yeah,
There was,
yeah,
and it's the thing, right? With Jimmy Garoppolo, if he was on the Seahawks, Seattle would have 1 or 2 or 3 more games. So
yeah.
I
Hmm.
mean, having a guy like Jimmy G compared to like if you played Drew Lock or Geno Smith the whole season, where you potentially could get a top 5 pick, top 7 pick. With Jimmy Garoppolo, you might get mid round, mid first round pick because Jimmy Garoppolo could definitely win you a couple more games if he was on the Seahawks. Seattle
I
is a
think
weird.
it's sorry to interrupt, but I think it's not so much the thought of Jimmy Garoppolo being on the Seahawks. It's the thought of losing to Jimmy Garoppolo as a member of the Seahawks. Like I think
Especially if that
that
happened
would
week 2 in
sting.
Levi's. Especially if
Oh
that
yeah,
happened week 2 in Levi's. Oh my goodness, that whole week, going through that whole week. Imagine the storylines. Imagine how many articles. Imagine everything. If Jimmy Garoppolo comes down to Levi's Stadium, and already the fans are waiting to see what Trey Lance does. Home opener, and Jimmy Garoppolo comes in Levi's and beats Trey Lance. Oh my goodness,
yeah, it would
that
be
would be
mayhem.
rough. But Bryant says Seattle is a weird thing. They beat us twice last year, 30-17 overall record. I mean, Seattle has our number. I mean, they've had our
Yeah.
number for a long time, and Shanahan, even when we have a healthy team, Shanahan maybe beats them once, but that's not even guaranteed. Compared to like in the regular season where we own McVay and we own the Rams, or you can't even say that anymore. I don't even think we can say that anymore. At least I wouldn't say that anymore because the Rams beat us in the NFC Championship game. I mean, I'll be honest. I'd rather have that. I'd rather lose to the Rams 6 times in a row and have that one NFC Championship game win.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
because that's what happened a few years ago against the Seahawks, right? Like when they that Greenlaw, keeping the tight end. I forget the Seahawks tight end, keeping him out of the end zone.
what's his
And
name? Forgot his
y-
name.
yeah, but you know what I mean. Like we had lost to the Seahawks
I
so
think it
many
was something
times
Hollander.
before
Something
that.
Hollander.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And it just made it that much sweeter to beat them in that way in that big of a game. Yeah, I totally I agree with you there.
yeah.
Jacob
Jacob
Hollister.
Hollister. Thank you,
Um
Carcast. Go check out his channel also. He's also another Niners content creator. Go check out his channel if you haven't already. Obviously on the stream, Carcast. Go check out his channel. Also another Niner content creator. When I started watching the Niners, like actually deeply started watching the Niners, watched every single game. The Niners sucked. Okay, the Niners were absolute garbage. Our quarterback situation was garbage. The team was rebuilding, and I would still watch every game. And like at that time, I didn't know too much about football. So like every week, I would sit at the TV and I'd be like, I usually sometimes watch Niners games at my grandpa's house, and he'd be like, "Are the Niners gonna win this week?" And I'm like, "Yes, they definitely are." And then they get blown out by the Cowboys by like 30, and then they'll get blown out by the Saints by like another 28, and I'm like, "Oh, great!" But Seattle, like, I mean, those first couple years, we never could beat Seattle, especially like when I started watching 2014, 2015, around that time. And that was after the Niners made it to the playoffs and after they lost the Super Bowl to the Ravens. But after that, I mean, when I started watching the Niners, they would always get beat by the Seahawks, like always. And it would be ugly.
mhm.
Like, it would be really ugly. Like, I remember one game in Thursday Night Football, like, we couldn't stop Marshawn Lynch, and Marshawn Lynch was killing us. Russell Wilson was killing us, and we got blown out. Like, we got blown out
Yeah.
that game.
Yep. That was
Yep.
ugly.
Yep. I mean, something about the Niners and the Seahawks, it's been happening for a while. Moving on to the last two topics of the day. What is one thing that you think Trey Lance needs to improve on? We talked about Jimmy Garoppolo. We talked about the 53-man roster. But what is one thing, in your opinion, that you think Trey Lance could or should improve on?
My umbrella answer would be that his mechanics need to be more consistent. But my specific answer would be that I think, sometimes when he throws to the outside or like outside the numbers, he tends to throw it high. And really a lot of his misses are high.
Right.
And but I feel like you have to be able to hit those short passes, those quick outs and things like that. And you have to be accurate on those because that's like in a way like that was Jimmy Garoppolo's bread and butter, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like yes, he could also work the intermediate levels of the field and, get those short passes as well, but those outlet receivers on the ends are going to be, very important in keeping drives alive. So I would say he needs to get a little more accurate in that, for sure. And that's something that didn't quite improve as much as I would have liked throughout training camp. So I think that's something he's definitely going to have to continue to work on, even through the season. But yeah, I mean, I would just say keep an eye on that because
Yeah.
that's something we repeatedly saw.
Yeah. Now, obviously, mechanics is the obvious choice because I think any quarterback, a lot of quarterbacks first coming in, I mean, Josh Allen said he also improved on his mechanics and he worked with Carson Palmer, who a lot of people have been talking, Jason Palmer, who Carson Palmer's brother.
Mhm.
But that's Jordan Palmer. I'm sorry, Jordan Palmer. I keep saying I'm messing up names. I'm getting confused between Jason Aponte and Jordan Palmer, just putting them together. Jason Palmer, but I think mechanics is an obvious issue that not an issue, but I think that's something that he can work on. But you made a great point. I think it's those short passes, the outside passes, and Jimmy's bread and butter was that making the quick throws, making 10 to 15 yard range, hitting them, being accurate on them. That was Jimmy's bread and butter, and that was something that Jimmy Garoppolo was really good at. And when Jimmy Garoppolo did throw the football, that was something that he was the most successful at. And I think that's something that Trey Lance can get better at. So I mean, like Jimmy Garoppolo's good at the short passes, but he's not good throwing deep, and I don't even think he can necessarily throw deep really, really well. Trey Lance can throw the deep ball, and he could
Mhm.
throw a hell of a deep ball. And we saw that in that Packers preseason game, which was a beautiful pass to Danny Gray. Such a nice spiral, just a beautifully thrown ball. But then like that outside miss to Danny Gray. And I mean, that's just the way this whole season will go, I think. This whole season will kind of go where Trey Lance will make spectacular throws, right?
Yep.
Rolling to his right, hitting Ayuk like we saw in that training camp video. That training camp
Hmm.
video of him rolling to his right, hitting Ayuk in the end zone. There'll be plays like that. And you're like, wow, that was amazing play. Jimmy Garoppolo. We've never seen that from Jimmy Garoppolo. And then
Yeah.
there'll be plays like what we saw in Houston where he's rolling to his right. I forgot who Ayuk was standing there, Check, whoever it was, and he tries to throw it across his body and across the field, and then he throws it and it hits the floor, and he probably got like
Yeah.
5 yards on it or something like that.
Yeah, I know people were wondering if that one was, like, tipped, and
It
it
wasn't
wasn't
tipped. It
tipped. It
wasn't
was
tipped.
just
I went back and watched
Yep.
it from multiple
Yeah,
angles.
no
It was not tipped. That
Yeah,
was
and
just
that's what's concerning, right? Because it should be those short, throws that should come second nature to,
yeah,
quarterbacks, especially if you want to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. So definitely those mechanics need to be cleaned up. Um, and those throws are the ones that are gonna those are the ones that sustain drives.
yeah,
It's great to be able to throw the long ball and be able to, get a touchdown here and there. But what's going to march you down the field are, throws like that. So definitely something to keep an eye on when the
yep.
season
He
begins.
has to improve on that. And throwing missing high, and that's something that you also mentioned. And that one day where Trey Lance threw like 3 interceptions, which I heard should have been 4, but Dante Johnson I think dropped one. But I heard a lot of the passes that he missed was just missing high. And you were at training camp, so I remember also from your reports that Trey Lance and I has missed high, and that was something that he needed to work on. And that was something even last training camp was that Trey Lance, when he would miss, it would just be high, and that was something that he would struggle on. But
Yeah, which I think that tells you that it's a mechanics thing
yeah, it's a
because his
mechanical issue.
misses his misses are consistent, It's
Yeah,
like it's always in the same kind of miss. And Jordan Nelly has mentioned this as well, which I totally agree with. If you're going to miss, it's probably better to miss high because at least in most cases defenders are going to be it's going to be too high for even the defenders to get
yeah,
to. So, it's better than having something low and in the field of play. But yeah, just something that will need to be worked on.
yep. And I mean, going back to training camp, like completion percentage compared to his accuracy, like that was like this whole buzz. And I've already talked about it before, but a lot of people are talking about his completion percentage, and they're like, "Oh, is Trey Lance accurate?" Da 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 da. Like I've always said, this is that Trey Lance in training camp compared to Jimmy Garoppolo in training camp, and you let me know because you were there, is that Trey Lance tries to push the ball downfield. And he's not afraid, like he tries to push the ball downfield, and he's willing to take those risks. And I've said this before, he's willing to take those risks where, like, going back to, like I said, that rollout to Ayuk or certain things like that, or if the pocket collapsing, Trey Lance is rolling to his left, rolling to his right, trying to, if Ayuk is going down, running across the field and he's like 20 yards down the field, Trey Lance will attempt the throw, and sometimes he'll miss and sometimes he'll hit, right? Sometimes it'll be behind Ayuk and you're like, what was that? And then sometimes he'll hit on it. And we saw that in the Texans game where like Trey
Mhm.
Lance, he had that one rollout pass where he hit Check beautifully with a dime. And then he had the other pass where he like threw it almost like went 5 yards and hit the ground, and it wasn't even close to reaching Ayuk, right? So the difference, like when people talk about his completion percentage, I think the reason why, like, there is misses. I won't say that there aren't misses because sometimes Trey Lance just straight up misses, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's high and he'll just straight up miss. But the reason why his completion percentage is so low is because Trey Lance tries to push the ball downfield, and then he's willing to take a risk. He's willing to take those risks in training camp and in practice. He didn't do that last year, but he was doing it this year. And I don't know if you saw that at all, but did you see that at all, where Trey Lance was taking risks, or when the pocket was collapsing, Trey Lance was rolling to his right or rolling to his left and trying to find a receiver, no matter if even if it wasn't like a check down, if it was like 20 yards down the field, Were you seeing that or no?
Yeah, I mean, one of the greater things about Trey Lance that I saw in training camp was the fact that, when the pocket does collapse, he has very good pocket awareness and he knows, when and where to escape from the pocket, which I think is a very underrated thing and it shows some maturity, right? Because a lot of young quarterbacks, that's not always second nature to them. So I think that's always been a good thing to see right off the bat. Trey Lance can do that, and not just that, but when he does escape the pocket, he does keep his eyes upfield. And to your point, yes, he does always, try to look for his targets, continues making his reads. We saw it even in the first preseason game, right? Like there was everyone talked about the touchdown of Danny Gray, but I felt like one of the his best play of the night was the one where he slid after the scramble. You can see him escape the pocket. He looked to set his feet again because
He looked
he
downfield. He
he's
looked
looking to
downfield the whole
throw.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's someone who continues to look to throw, and that's really good. And when it wasn't there, then he reverted to you know running the ball and scrambling and
Yeah.
sliding for the first time in his life. But but no, like yeah, I think that's definitely one difference that we can expect to see between, Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo is that yes, Trey Lance does want to push the ball downfield. I felt like in the first week of camp, he almost wanted to do that too much, where he wasn't even paying attention to his checkdowns. Like your checkdowns are there to help you out, and if
And
you don't
Jimmy
see anyone
utilizes that.
open,
Jimmy utilized that, right?
exactly. And Jimmy Garoppolo, he's a vet. He's very efficient. I would even argue that Nate Sudfeld in training camp was very efficient, and a lot of the times that's why Nate Sudfeld's numbers in camp looked so
We're
great because
better.
he
Yeah.
he was very similar in he just knows where to go with the ball, you know, in order to get a completion. And at the end of the day, like that is more important than doing having the big play. And I think the second week of training camp, I think Trey Lance became better at finding his checkdowns and being okay with those shorter passes. And, it's good that he takes risks, right? Because in if you're not going to do that in training camp or practice, like when else can you do that? I wouldn't suggest you go out in a game
Yeah, and
and
I'd
take
rather have that. I'd rather him do that in a practice or in training camp than do that in a game.
exactly.
Because if he makes that mistake in training camp, he can watch the film back and he can say, "Okay, what could I
Yeah.
have done better?" But if you do that in a game, that's a mistake and that's a turnover that could decide the game. So I'd rather,
Right.
like I said, I'd rather him. I said this before, like I'd rather him if he does make a mistake or if he does miss, I'd rather him miss or make that mistake in training camp or in practice than him doing it in an actual game because in an actual game it actually matters, right? Whereas training camp, I'm not saying it
Right.
doesn't matter, but it goes on your record, and that one turnover, that one missed pass or whatever it might be, could impact the game. So
Yeah.
and impact the chances of the Niners winning that football game.
Exactly. Every snap matters in, the regular season. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I think he that's something that he did improve on, and but there's a balance, of course, right? He's
Yeah.
still looking downfield. He's not just always taking the check down. I think he just got better at having that balance, which I think is important.
Yep. Well, last topic of the day before we get on out of here. Are the 49ers more concerned about Trey Lance than they're letting on? We obviously know they brought back Jimmy. A lot of people are saying they brought back Jimmy because they are concerned about Trey Lance and they're not really telling the media too much. But do you think the 49ers are more concerned about Trey Lance than they're letting on?
Um that's tough. Honestly, I don't want to say no. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I feel like there are some people who know some things, but at the same time there are some people who are just stating their opinion, who sometimes have reports, so even their opinions sound like reports, right? So that happens. I don't know. I don't want to believe that they're concerned about Trey Lance. Is it possible? Yeah, anything's possible. There's been so many times that I've ignored the warning signs of like things reporters have said. The only thing that I'll kind of, I guess, I that I should put the most stock in, and everyone else as well, is what local reporters say, because at the end of the day, I don't think that they all of them would lie to us. So at this moment in time, I don't think any of them are really too concerned. Although it was interesting to see what Matt Mayoko has said about Jimmy Garoppolo being back. He seems to be the only one right now who is skeptical. And again, that seems like so far that's just based on his opinion of the situation, where I think one quote was like, he doesn't feel like it's so clear cut that Trey Lance is the QB1
I
because they
heard that.
brought
I
back
heard
Jimmy
that. Yeah.
Garoppolo. So yeah, that's the only one that I'm like, oh, like that's not good. That one of our guys, one of 49ers beat reporters who is very close to the team would have that sentiment. But as far as like the outside media, I wouldn't pay as much attention to that. But I always think about those times when, back when there was a lot of drama between, Jed York, Trent Baalke, and Jim Harbaugh. I feel like back then, when all those reports were going around, I ignored all of those, and I was like, no, this is all a lie. There's nothing. I remember like Tim K was like huge in reporting all of that, and he was always reporting about all of the drama. Like, there's issues, and everyone was like, no, like everyone like rebelled against Tim K, and it was like Tim K against all the 49er fans, and it ended up being true, right? Like, so I think to an extent you can only ignore so much. I think right now it's just outside noise, but once it starts, to trickle in, if it starts to trickle in from like, 49ers media, then I think we have to listen, right? But as of right now, I don't think there's much concern.
See, I don't even know. Like, I honestly can't tell you if they're concerned. Now, here's what I will say. I think they definitely wish that Trey Lance would have done better throughout training camp, and that touchdown to interception ratio would have been better. And I think they would have liked to see more from that third preseason game, and I'd like to see him be better than what he was. And I don't think he was bad. And obviously, he's a rookie, so he's not a rookie, but obviously, he doesn't have a lot of game experience. He didn't have a lot of college. He only played one full year at college, unlike a lot of other guys. And shout out to Vish, but I remember Vish saying this point on Larry Kruger's show was that I think he said all the Hall of Fame quarterbacks have thrown over 1,200 pass attempts in college, and then when they come into the league, they're more prepared. And I think that's what he said, that all the Hall of Fame quarterbacks had 1,200 reps in college, and when they came to the league, um, or before they started, they were more prepared. So I mean, I think the Niners would have probably wished to see more from Lance. I don't necessarily know if they're concerned. I think there are probably some worries, maybe, and I think there's probably things that the Niners wish he was better at. But at the end of the day, I think the Niners also understand that he's young. He's very young. He still has time to develop. He still has time to grow, and it's gonna be a learning process, and there's gonna be some ups this year. There are gonna be some downs, and at the end of the day, I think the Niners they're gonna roll with the punches. We'll see what happens, but he's a rookie at the end of the day. There's gonna be, like I said, there's gonna be some plays where Trey Lance is just spectacular, and he'll make spectacular
Mm-hmm.
throws, like you saw in those training camp clips. And then there'll also be throws like that throw to Ayuk where he kind of miss, or where he misses to Danny Gray on the outside. Like, they'll be good and they'll be bad.
Yeah.
And if the more he plays, the more he'll get better at it. The more experience he'll gain. Not like I said, I think the Niners are a little bit concerned, and I think they wish he was better at certain things. But I think at the end of the day, the Niners realize he's still a rookie, he's still young, and he still has a lot of room to grow. And he has a lot of potential, and that's why the Niners drafted him. And like,
Yeah.
compared to Mac Jones and Trey Lance, Mac Jones is probably a better quarterback right now. But if Trey Lance becomes what the Niners and all of us think he's going to become, you have potentially a top 10 quarterback in the NFL if Trey Lance reaches that ceiling, which I think he possibly could. So that's why the Niners drafted him, because he has a high ceiling, that potential. If Trey Lance is what we think he can become, that's why the Niners drafted him. So obviously there'll be ups and downs, but we will see. We'll see. This is gonna be an interesting season. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of storylines. We'll obviously get to see a new quarterback under center, but overall, this will be an interesting season.
yeah, and like you said, there's going to be a lot of up and downs. It's going to be volatile. Trey Lance will be, and we got to be prepared for that. And one of the other reasons, aside from Trey Lance having the high ceiling, him having all of the physical athletic tools, is the fact that he has a very high football IQ, and that's another thing that they're betting on because that can lessen, I guess, like the margin of how the difference. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, it'll make it easier for him to catch up to, because right now he's really raw. So if he can get all of the, if he makes a mistake, but he's able to understand, you know, why that happened, the different coverages, things like that. If he can learn quickly, which I think the 49ers are really banking on that as well, then I think he'll be fine. I mean, I know you said like the reps obviously is a really big thing. And ideally, you want to have all those reps coming into the NFL and not getting them in the NFL because it's going to be just that much harder. But I do truly feel like Trey Lance is intelligent enough to
Yeah,
overcome, all of that.
and Trey Lance has the work ethic to overcome that.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
just based off what you've seen all off season is that Trey Lance has been putting in the work. He watches film. He watched a lot of film at NDSU. Like Trey Lance, I love the work ethic because you're not gonna be great by sitting there not putting in any work. Like Trey Lance has a lot of talent and he's working at becoming better. And he knows he has talent. He knows he has a good arm. He knows what he can do on the football field and he's trying to improve on it. And he knows the NFL is not the FCS. It's not even close to being the FCS. It's a harder, more faster, more physical game. And he knows that if he's just sitting on the couch not doing anything, it's gonna be hard for him. And he can overcome that just because he has that work ethic, and that work ethic already at such a young age to have such an amazing work ethic to be so mature for his age. I think it's a great sign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep,
Yeah,
and
this is a great comment.
Yep.
Good point.
David McNew says Trey Lance is starting with a great team around him. Most QBs drafted early start on bad team. That's a great point, right? Because Josh Allen and Trey Lance, that's the comparison that a lot of people threw out pre-draft, and that was this whole comparison. Trey Lance, unlike Josh Allen's on a good team. So that definitely helps Trey Lance because unlike even the guys in his own draft class, Trey Lance has a pretty good team, has a great offensive play caller. He has a lot of things going for him. Whereas a lot of rookies, when they come into the league and they're drafted, they're high drafted or high draft picks, they don't really have a lot of things going for them. They're usually on teams that have a new head coach, a
Hmm.
rebuilding team. So Trey Lance definitely has a lot going for him.
And Kyle Shanahan always puts his quarterbacks in positions to win. He is going to try to mask as much of your shortcomings as possible, right? So I think with that, along with what David said here, the fact that the 49ers have an amazing team from top to bottom around him, it's going to greatly benefit him for sure.
Yep. And Sugarnaut says if Trey Lance works out, Kyle's a genius. Kyle's already a genius, but I think definitely Kyle. It would definitely elevate Kyle, um, among the head coach rankings if Trey Lance turns out to be what we think he is. Because maybe Trey Lance, I think Niners probably if Trey Lance is what we think he is, I think the Niners could possibly win number 6 with Trey Lance. Now I don't know about this year, but I think down the road, if Trey Lance gets better and Trey Lance is what we think he is, I think the Niners probably could win number 6 with Trey Lance under center. We definitely have the team to do it. Why would you take a project third overall? I watched Malik Willis Saturday. He wasn't great, but the things that make him special are obvious. Yeah, Malik Willis. I mean, he had some phenomenal throws, right? Like Malik Willis, he uses his legs a lot. So like compared the difference between I would say Malik Willis and Trey Lance is both of them can make really nice throws, spectacular plays. But I feel like Malik
Hmm.
Willis, when the play breaks down, he usually runs right away. Where like from what I've seen, whereas Trey Lance, if the play breaks down, when he has to use his legs, And when it's a must, he
Mhm.
will. But he's always trying to
Yeah.
look downfield, trying to look for his receiver. As Malik Willis, he doesn't see it. Pocket is collapsing. He's going right. And he makes spectacular plays with his legs. I mean, he obviously had that one spectacular sidearm throw that a lot of people have been buzzing about. And I mean, we mentioned already, these guys have a lot of potential, a lot of talent, and this will be an interesting season. We'll see what happens. Appreciate you, and I think we have a new viewer. I think this is Sugar Nuts, the new viewer. So appreciate you for tapping in. I want to give a massive shout out to my moderators. They're phenomenal. They're amazing. Always tune in. Always show love to the shows. David McNew, thank you so much for tuning in. Brian, obviously, another moderator. Appreciate you also for tuning in. Camper Report pops in here last minute. He's also another Niner content creator. He just did a show with Jesse Naylor, so go check that out. Camper Report, another phenomenal Niner content creator. Go subscribe to his channel. Any final comments before we wrap this up? I appreciate you for joining me, Steph.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'll just end it with, I'll continue to echo that, Trey Lance, there are gonna be some up and downs. Just be prepared for that, like don't just be prepared for that and be prepared to be patient because that's what it's gonna take to get where we want Trey Lance to go. He's gonna have
Yeah.
to go through the ups and downs. So yeah, just that's all. Practice patience. That's it.
Yep. Chris says listening while doing other
What's
things.
up, Chris?
Listening in while I do other things. I appreciate you also for tuning in, Chris. If you haven't already subscribed to Steph's channel, go do that. 49 Carats podcast, obviously. Go check out her channel and amazing stuff. She did a stream earlier today, broke down the 53-man roster, talked a little bit about Jimmy. Amazing show. Go check out her channel if you haven't already. Before, I want to ask you, how was the Bay? How'd you like the Bay? Because I think you spent way more time here than you spent in Minnesota. But how'd you like the Bay? How was the experience?
I mean, I'm from the Bay, originally. So anytime I can, go home and be around family is always a good time. And yeah, being out there for 2 weeks and I was working like my actual job. I work from home, but like I took my work laptop and I was like working in the morning before camp and like going back and working right after camp and after I did my lives. So it was exhausting 2 weeks, but it was a great experience, and I can't wait to do it again next year.
Hey, I saw that video of your brother's fan cave. I mean,
Oh
that is
yeah,
that is
we're gonna do another
nice.
video soon.
That
Because I'm gonna
is
be out there.
nice. That
Yeah, I'm
looked
gonna
like
be
it
out there
took.
for the.
That looked like it
Oh,
took a long time to put together. He had the Joe Montana autograph, the Jerry Rice
oh yeah,
autograph, like signed jersey. It was nice. It was. I would love to be sitting and watching Niners games from that room. I mean, amazing, amazing, amazing fan cave. That's what they
yeah.
call
He
it, right?
put a
Fan
lot
cave.
of
Yeah.
man cave. Yeah, he put
Yeah,
a
man
lot of
cave.
work and money into into all that memorabilia. He loves that stuff. But yeah, I'll probably be doing another show with him because I'll be out there for the home opener. So we'll probably do a live stream before that or something,
Yep.
before or after.
One last shout out to Always Faithful 24/7, another phenomenal Niner content creator. He does a show every Wednesday with the Faithful Huddle, who are very knowledgeable, also Niner fans. Go check out his channel if you haven't already. He says, "What's up, Amin and Steph? Keep evolving." Appreciate you for tapping in. And lastly, like I said, subscribe to Steph's YouTube channel. Follow her on Twitter at 49K. I'm pretty sure 49K at Steph 49K right next to
So
me.
this is my personal, and this is where I'm most active, right? Like all
R.I.P.
my 49er
Stragosaurus.
takes are right here, all of them
R.I.P.
right here.
Stragosaurus.
Steph 49K. Yeah, Amin is mourning my old username, Stragosaurus, but now I am Steph 49K. So you definitely want to follow me there. And
Yeah.
if you want to follow the podcast on Twitter,
That link
it's
is also in the description. That
let's
link is also in the
go.
description. We got
Okay, you're
both links
ready.
in the description.
Let's
All right,
go.
YouTube
Okay.
and both Twitter links in the description. So also
I
follow
love it. I
Steph,
love it.
and then also follow the podcast on Twitter. You guys are at like
Love it.
900 followers. You guys are reaching to that 1K mark on Twitter.
It's
So
close.
go follow the podcast also on Twitter. Go show the podcast some love as well. I appreciate you for joining me, Steph. Subscribe to this channel. Trying to get to 1K, long journey, but we're getting there. We're getting closer day by day. Appreciate
Yeah, man. We'll get
you
you
for
there, man.
joining me. Appreciate you for joining me, Steph. Go Niners. Football starts in 9 days, 8 days. Looking forward to
12.
it. How many days?
I think it's 12.
12? I don't know. The Niners put like a tweet like 10 days, and I'm like, okay, I just went with it. But no,
I
10
saw,
days.
well,
10 days
yeah, I don't know.
10 days till I think, or nine days until the Bills and the Rams play. So
Okay.
Niners game. I think you gotta wait 3 more days. But yeah, sure or
Okay,
not,
that's
Steph's
fair.
been killing it. She definitely has been. Great
Uh,
show, Faithful. I appreciate it. Well, that basically wraps up the show. Go Niners! I appreciate you for joining me, Steph, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Thanks for having me on.